let's talk data strategy. Nobody tells you how to do it. And that was the experience Jessica had at Not on the High Street. We've heard all about the team, the culture, technology. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Jessica. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about a day in the life of Jessica at Not on the High Street.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron. So for those of you who haven't come across Not on the High Street before, we're basically an online marketplace that supports artisans, designers, and curators from across the UK. We've got over 5,500 small business partners selling over 370,000 products with us. So it's a really great place for gifts, for homeware, for all sorts of things to spoil yourself with. And yeah, I'm the engineering manager for the data team at Not on the High Street. So
that must be a big challenge, actually. 300,000 products is not your normal kind of company. Like, quite often companies deal with a handful of products and lots of sales. So I imagine your data job is pretty difficult.
Yeah, because it's a marketplace, right? So now you're basically a storefront for loads of different businesses. So there's data for each business on your website that you're dealing with. So kind of akin to Amazon on a much smaller scale, I guess. But there's a lot of data at Not on the High Street as the data platform team. So we're responsible for basically ingesting data into Snowflake and making sure that everybody in the business has the data that they need to make the decisions that they need to make. We work quite closely with an insights and analytics team who kind of reports into the business side. My team focuses more on the tech side of things, but we work quite closely together to make sure the company has all the data that they need.
That's interesting, actually. So that as a setup, you have the kind of engineering responsibility for data supply, but the analytics teams sit in the business and in the business teams.
Yeah, so they are focused primarily on one area. Some analysts kind of work in more than one area, but they will be specialists, for example, in marketing data, and they work very closely with the marketing team to help them with whatever kind of insights they would need to make decisions. So previously, before I joined, there was one kind of data team that was run by a head of data, and before I joined, they split out into two teams with a data platform team and an insights and analytics team. So
I see that a lot, actually, as a sort of overall strategy for what companies are doing with their data teams. I'm not sure it's happened, deliberately or just organically, but it seems like a very successful setup, to me at least. The companies take their data teams, put them closer to IT with kind of looking after infrastructure and a role to support the business. And of course, the people who understand the business sit in the business. That seems like a good idea.
I think it works most of the time. There's some kind of aspects where, because it's kind of a crossover role, like the analysts are heavily dependent on the work that we do. So we still need to have an understanding of the business in order to model the data correctly so it can be used. So we still have a lot of interactions with business because they're our stakeholders as well. But we don't necessarily answer those like very small questions that an analyst would help with, or those in-depth projects where they kind of go quite deep into the data to investigate it. We kind of make sure they have the data to do that, and that it's modeled in the right way and has all the necessary things, but we don't necessarily then end up answering those questions.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. It's quite hard to know about 300,000 different things.
Well, I mean, a product is a concept of a product. You don't have to know about all of them.
Cool. So I would like to, I think, maybe if you set the scene for us. So if you cast your mind back to when you first started and that initial couple of weeks, I think that would be a great introduction for everyone to what the team was like, company was like, what the sort of problem was like as you saw it when you first started.
So I moved to the UK about 2 years ago, straight from Johannesburg. Hadn't lived here before, had visited a few times, but hadn't lived here before. And I moved and started a new job like within 3 weeks of moving here. So that was quite a new thing. I was starting completely new country, a completely new role. So yeah, I joined not on the high street as initially as tech lead for data engineering team, but shortly after I arrived, it was clear that that was no longer really my role. A few other people had left and they weren't going to replace them. So within the first week, I was introduced to my team, which was just more than the data engineers. It was also the analytics engineers and the data scientists, which was quite interesting. There's a big team for you to manage. I was like ready for my little small team of 2 people in the data engineering sphere, but because I had some experience with analytics engineering and like a smidgen of experience with data science, I think they figured I could handle it. The company went through a bit of a restructuring, and eventually my title ended up being engineering manager for data. So that's where we're at now. But yeah, the first few weeks were interesting. It was my brand new team, brand new company, brand new country.
Everything new. It sounds like you set out on an adventure and you got what you asked for. Was it scary though? Was that like, oh my God, what am I going to do?
I don't think scary. I think very overwhelming. So it was like a bunch of new things and just trying to figure out, like, does the UK work in the same way as other businesses I've worked in the past? Like, I've worked in African companies and they have a certain way of working. Is it the same in the UK? Will my sarcasm be appreciated? Because not everyone. It is. So, like, at least everyone gets my sarcasm here, which is fantastic. Yeah, I came into a team that had gone through a huge amount of changes, like the past 3-4 months before I joined. 3 of the data leaders within the team had left. So everything was a little bit up in the air. There was a data product manager at the time, was like trying to keep things together, trying to keep things on track. She had a lot of like ideas and things she wanted implemented. There was like 1 or 2 ideas outstanding from the head of data who had just left. But otherwise, it was kind of just like, here's a data team. We need to do these 2 projects. Everything else is kind of just go for it. And we need to save a lot of money. So all your stuff is very expensive. Figure out how to reduce your costs. That was the kind of directive I'd gotten from people within the team. When I joined, I was also reporting to he starts with the head of architecture. So he hadn't really managed a data team before. He didn't have any experience with data, so it was a bit of a learning experience for him. Now I report to the VP of engineering, so a little bit different of a data structure. So he has a little bit more experience with data, but again, within like the senior leadership team, nobody has a lot of data experience, so it's kind of everybody figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, that seems pretty normal, that companies almost don't know what to make of the data team. They sort of have an inkling what the output they want. Often it's not very well formed, from what I've seen. And how do you go about engaging with users? Like so these are your managers. These are the people that obviously give you resources or give you permission to do things, but they don't help you figure out what to do. So how do you go about finding users and what they are?
So initially, when we had a data product manager, that was one of her main responsibilities, was to kind of understand the problems within the business and make sure we were coming up with the right solutions to address those problems. Because there were a couple of projects that are, like, for example, our data scientists worked on that were really cool. Like, here is a problem that I'm solving, and then give it to the end user, and they're like, but that's not what I wanted. And I think that's such a common thing that happens. So I think that was the first project that the data product manager was involved in, where she was like, wait, no, we're wasting time here. So we've been a lot more conscious since then of actually qualifying requirements and making sure people actually know what they want. So you spend a lot more time on that discussion phase, that figuring out phase, rather than the implementation phase. Then continuous consultation throughout projects, just to make sure people, yes, understand like what you're going to be doing, get their input and their feedback at every stage of the process. So everybody's kind of collaborating more. So the end result is actually used, which I think helps. Now that we no longer have a data product manager, that kind of falls on me to chat to people. over the past year, we did work on one project, and it was kind of the only thing we were working on. So it was a GA4 migration. It was painful, and it took a really long time, and we had to say no to a lot of people because the team was quite small. So like we pushed back on a lot of initiatives or different projects that people would like us to implement. But now that's over, we actually have time now. So it's now about like actually talking to our stakeholders, listening to their problems and figuring out, okay, how can we help you? Like, we're a team, we've got access to a lot of things. We have problem solving capabilities that, how can we help you solve that? So it's more about engaging with stakeholders regularly just to kind of get their feel for it.
Yeah.
As well as we have like our own project that we have on the side to like improve our infrastructure, simplify things, reduce our costs, because that's a continuing thing. Like, do we need to be spending that many Snowflake credits every day? Probably not. There's ways we can improve it.
Yeah. I mean, to be quite clear, you tell us a bit more about that. So, we went back in the team, kind of what the company looked like. But as you said, you came into this new role and you were presented with whatever was left behind, technology-wise and infrastructure. The cost motivation, you're changing some things to reduce costs. Are you changing some things to be more productive, or what are the sort of main drivers for that infrastructure work?
So in terms of infrastructure, like where we, as an example, one of the cost savings that we did have, so we were paying an external SaaS provider for Airflow, and Airflow is an open source product. So there's no real need to pay someone to host that for you. It used to fail every Thursday, and like all our DAGs would just stop running on a Thursday, and I'm like, oh, they're doing an upgrade. That's cool. And that used to irritate me. So now one of the cost saving initiatives we did was to move our Airflow infrastructure over to Kubernetes. So it's now self-hosted, runs. I think we've had one issue in the year that it's been running. So it's a lot more stable. We're in control of it, and it's significantly cheaper every month to run now. Yeah. So that's like an instant cost saving. So we didn't change the technology, we just changed the way we were hosting it. Obviously, you need the skills in-house to be able to do that kind of thing. So not all companies have that available. We're lucky our infrastructure team is very helpful. Our engineers in my team like to learn new things, so that also helps. So that's kind of one initiative. The other is just looking at queries and seeing if they're efficient or not. Snowflake has quite a good query visualizer, kind of breaks down how your queries are, and you can kind of see the paths that it's spending a lot of time on. So if the longer it runs, the more it costs. So you can start to optimize and like remove crappy joins or re-optimize like your SQL in general, like the general kind of steps that you would do to re-optimize your SQL. Window functions are generally a big point of expense if they're not working properly. Just small things like that. Removing tables that aren't necessary, kind of thing. It's just kind of constantly thinking, and then also renegotiating contracts with suppliers. So as much as I dislike talking to people, I've had a lot of conversations with suppliers to see if they can give us better terms, or at least like split our payments up, or if there's an alternative supplier that can supply the same product, just engaging with that. So that was like at least one director from the business that I was able to at least pick up right away and work on. Was coming in, there was no data strategy for the company when I joined, or not that I was aware of or can find on any of the documentation anyway. So that was another thing that I wanted to do, was create data strategy, and that's something my current boss wants as well. Just what are we actually going to do with data? And it started with me kind of actually just, what do we currently have? There was no data architecture diagram when I joined. There was like one or two diagrams for like very specific services, but there was no overall picture of what does data look like at Northern High Street. Here is a beautiful picture that I've now created. Here's all the data sources that we're ingesting from. Here are all the databases that we look at. Here is all the egress points. So we now have like a picture, and that also then helps you to identify, okay, where could we improve? Is there anything missing?
It's amazing how much value that adds, just having a picture that everyone agrees this is what it is. There's all too often like 10 little things in the corner that nobody really understands that's crucial to the way things operate, or that if they break, they might do it a significant problem. What did you do during that exercise to draw the diagram? Were you just like PowerPoint and just touch down, or were you like, okay, I'm going to get a whole video type thing, or was that collaborative? How did you go about the architecture part?
So that was in Miro. It was like all the tools I know we had. So for example, we used Stitch for most of our data ingestion, and it was just kind of mapping out all the different interfaces we had in Stitch. Then on top of that, we use Airflow, and we have a couple of batch containers that run custom API integrations. And then was going into each GitHub repo, figuring out like what it does, where it comes from, and just kind of understanding all the different possible data sources that we have, and just brain dumping it into Miro and then starting to organize it. And then where I didn't understand something, asking one of my team members, like, can you explain this to me? How is the service working? Do we have a diagram that explains it?
Yeah. Any situation where someone had left, because you mentioned the team, a little bit of a turnover in the team, so there might have been services. So I've seen it quite a lot where services are like, oh, we don't touch that because that was the previous person and then gone.
Yeah, so we do have a few of those. I mean, there's a lot of code that hasn't been, like, we're looking at things now and they're no longer really fit for purpose. And you're like, how long ago was this written? Because, I mean, it's fine, it's good enough, but it like just doesn't have newer data in it, or like it's structured in a way that no longer makes sense for the purpose that it's serving. So, I mean, Not on the High Street as a company is 18 years old, so it's got a lot of history. Data has gone through many iterations of the company. I mean, a couple of years ago, they had a machine under somebody's desk, and when the cleaning service came in at night to clean, they would unplug it, and then the pipelines for the day wouldn't run. Like, moving from that to cloud infrastructure, they had a Redshift database at one point. We're now using Snowflake. Different PR tools have been used. So it's gone through a lot of ebbs and flows throughout the years. There's been a massive team with, I think at one stage there were like 5 data scientists, and now we've got 1. So we're a lot leaner now. So currently my team has 2 analytics engineers, 1 data engineer, and a data scientist. So we're quite small, and everybody kind of takes on roles that typically wouldn't see. They will do something that's not typically something like, for example, a data scientist would do, but just because there's only so many people and so much work that needs to get done, people end up having to do things that aren't typically what they would do. My team is quite happy to do that. They like the learning opportunities, so that's always positive.
Mm-hmm. So when we met a few weeks ago, one of the things that really caught my attention, you were giving a talk, and it was mostly about your strategy and how you went about forming it. But in particular, this idea of using a Wardley map was new to me, and I instantly loved it. The way it laid it out, the way it like communicated to everyone what was visible and important, but then not visible and important was sort of also, I think as a person running an engineering team, is often really hard to explain that this crucial piece that no one can see, we need to do something about. And tell us a little bit more about your map and how you discovered it, and then how you communicate it, how you actually use it as a tool.
Yeah, so Wardley mapping I kind of came across by accident. Before that, so I was tasked with like, I need to put together a data strategy. So I'd like been looking into a number of things. I did a lot of research. Like, there's a lot of like it's from different consulting firms, like, this is what your data strategy should have, and it's like really long and intense, and no one's going to read 50 pages of data strategy. And so it's a lot of like buzzwords and keywords that are meaningless to anybody who doesn't understand them. So it needs to be like, for me, I want things to be simple. I want it to be easy for me to understand, because I don't have a typical data background. I've only been working in data for the past 5 years. So it was important to me that it was something that I could understand. I have a mentor, and she pointed me towards like data maturity analysis. So I looked into that, and it started to make a little bit more sense. But forum I'm a part of, somebody posted a link to a video with Simon Wardley, who's the inventor of Wardley Maps. He was doing a talk, I think it was at CCOM, explaining the whole concept of a Wardley map. And it was at that point I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. So he was talking about Wardley Maps and how it helped him drive the strategy for his technology company at the time. He goes through the whole background of how he read a lot of books about war and the strategy within war and how maps are used in war and how you kind of develop your strategy and like
troops
which
or
approach you're going to take.
resources. Yeah, very. You can imagine how the concept applies actually.
So yeah, it was like, I was just like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. And he had a very good like example of how he applied it to his photo upload business and like where they could kind of see things. So the idea behind a Wardley map is you basically focus on a specific user and their needs within the organization. Then all of those needs have their own needs. And it kind of starts to cascade down, and you eventually get to the point where you have a complete picture of a particular process or a particular service. And the way a Wardley map works is you kind of put your user at the top of it, and then you've got all their needs, and then you can start to map their needs on the Wardley map. So top to bottom is however close it is to the user, it's more visible to them. They probably care a little bit more about it. The further away from the user, the less they would care about it or the less visible it is to them. So data, for example, users use Looker reports or Tableau reports on a daily basis. So that's very visible to them. So your Tableau and Looker would be quite near to the top. Whereas your data warehouses, Snowflake, BigQuery, whatever you're using, they don't care. They like maybe hear you say Snowflake once in a while, and they don't like, as long as where's my graph? That's what I care about. I don't really care where it's coming from, just make the graph visible. So the less kind of visible, the less things people care about, those kind of at the bottom. And then when you're looking from left to right on a Wardley map, that's kind of how evolved a particular component in your map would be. So on the left, be things that are very new, like you're still exploring them and aren't well-developed ideas. And then as you move more to the right, it's kind of things that are well-developed, commoditized solutions, things you can just buy off the shelf. You're never going to create your own data warehouse nowadays. It's done. You're not going to create your own BI tool necessarily. You just buy one off the shelf. So those kind of things sit on the very far right. And then in between is kind of, things that you're developing in-house. There's still ideas. You're still working on them, going towards this is quite established. We don't do much maintenance on it, but it's still something we're responsible for in-house.
Yeah. Do you show that to people? Do you then take that to meetings and to explain to leadership, this is what our architecture looks like? And do they understand it when you show it, if you do?
So it was this year that I created it because I wanted to create it as part of our data strategy, and was a great motivator for me to be able to show why I wanted to do some more like tech-oriented projects rather than business impacting projects. So they do impact the business, and I was able to show how. So one of our projects is we have 2 DBT repos within Not on the High Street, one that runs on DBT Core, one that runs on DBT Cloud. So DBT Cloud is a commoditized solution. It just works. They upgrade it whenever you need an upgrade. You don't have to maintain it very much. Whereas DBT Core, you now are responsible for making sure you have the latest version, that it runs. If it breaks, you need to figure out why it's breaking. And there's no need for such a small team to be maintaining 2 solutions. So I want to, it's been on our roadmap forever. We want to merge these, but it's never really been something that we could explain why we wanted to prioritize it. But now we've got a map. There's 2 DBT dots on the map. One very far apart from another. One is in commoditized, one is not in commoditized. And it was then easy for me to explain the purpose of that project and then also align it with our goals.
I absolutely love that. It's so crucial that the thing that really stood out to me is you've got this business requirement. Yes, there's always these business requirements, and they kind of know what that is. So you mentioned your GA4 project. Well, that turns into some kind of reporting and decision making. But then there's this other aspect, which is all the kind of infrastructure that means it's much slower than it should be to achieve, or there's this kind of you suddenly get to highlight, well, yes, you have your business requirement, but we have this kind of our own mess to sort out to make things simpler, which absolutely
exactly.
And a load of people have that exact issue.
And I think it's really useful that one of our tech goals as a technology team as a whole, since the data platform team forms part of the technology team at Not on the High Street, one of the goals or the strategy for tech as a whole is to simplify things, because we've got a lot of unnecessary complicated logic and infrastructure and things like that. So for us to tie into the overall tech strategy, like this is how we want to simplify things, this is how we want to improve things, it then ties back, and now I've got like a visual representation and an easy way to talk through something, because people can understand, like I may not understand what DBT is or how it works or what it does, but the fact that you have 2 dots on the map and you only want one, that I understand.
That I can get straight away.
Exactly. So it simplifies things, and it makes it easier to talk about why you would want to do something.
Why do you think data seems so hard to understand? Yeah, the VP of engineering is in and around data all the time. Yeah, as you pointed out, they don't really have experience of what data is or what data means to the company. Why is it so hard for people to understand what it is?
I think because it bridges the gap between business and technology. So they will get the tech side of things and they kind of understand the business, but it's this hybrid role where you kind of having to understand the business needs in such a way, because it's not the same as like normal kind of tech operation where I need this extra field on the website because I want to do this. Like that's easy to understand. There's a set requirements where somebody's like, I want to know how many orders happen through this channel 2 a.m. and what type of customer was up at 2 a.m. doing that. Like it's a little bit more obscure. Like data isn't well defined. Like it can be very floaty, if that's the right word. Like there's no like
messy, it is making next to messy. Actually, that is this whole function.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that are quite well defined in data, and I think that's the part that people understand, but it's that like floaty space in between that where it starts to get complicated. Also, there's a lot of technology and terminology that's different from like a normal tech process or a normal business process. So it's just making sure you use easy to understand language when you're talking about things. Like one of the problems we had was our data was only being like available after lunch in Looker, so people could only really see data for the day before at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which is terrible.
That happens is pretty hard.
Exactly. Like eventually I boiled it down. I created a simplified diagram and took my stakeholders through like, this is why, like, I know, like, I hate it too. I also don't think you should only have your data at 1 o'clock, but these were the 10 steps involved in the process to get to that point where we have data. And this is what we're going to do to try and fix that. And then we were able to simplify it. People have their data when they log in the morning. So like
all that sort of appeared as a couple of dots on your map. We get these reports after lunch, or they're only fresh after lunch, and these are these 2 dots. And then that muscle is so useful to explain what that is the problem.
So having diagrams, even if it's not just the map, just having simplified pictures of things and taking people through it and using simpler language that's not like our ETL process is going to take 2 hours because we're waiting for Google to upload data to their servers or whatever the reason is. It's just like we only can work with what we've got. This is the pain point you have. We agree it's a pain point. These are the things we're going to do to solve it. I think it's the more you explain things to people and bring them into your world, the more understanding they are later on. So any kind of thing that facilitates a conversation, whether it's a Wardley map or architecture diagram or something like that, definitely helps.
So you said you don't really like talking to people, but you seem very good at it. I mean, it seems like Not on the High Street gets it's a lot of communication, very clear understanding what the issues are, and like you said, you're building those relationships. How do you reconcile those 2 things? Like you must be doing a good job talking to them, but you say, is it a challenge, or you don't enjoy it, or?
I think it's just I'm quite introverted, so speaking to people is not something that comes like naturally. I'd rather just stay by myself, but I like to challenge myself to do things that make me uncomfortable. like
Yeah.
a podcast, I wouldn't typically do this, but it's like
Well,
the
again,
more
you're doing a
you,
very good job of it. So.
I think that like just to grow as a person, the more you kind of challenge yourself, put yourself out of your comfort zone, that's kind of where you realize things that you enjoy or kind of, yeah, I mean, if you did the same thing all the time, I mean, that's perfectly fine if that's what you want, but I want to challenge myself. I don't necessarily want to kind of not speak to people.
I think that will take you an awful long way. I certainly relate to that. That I look for the challenge, and I see people look for the challenge. They are growing and they're looking for the next thing. I suppose that brings a kind of interesting question. We've got the background and the map of where we are. Are there some other big challenges on the horizon, and how do you intend to deal with this?
I think this is probably the challenge for a lot of data teams is everybody wants AI and more ML. I think with the rise of ChatGPT and other LLMs, there's been a big focus from a business perspective now, like this new cool new technology is available, like how can we use it? And it's understanding what that AI and ML roadmap would look like. But you have to get the fundamentals right before you can even start to do that. There's no point in using a machine learning model or an AI model to do something if your data is crap. Like you need it you need to be able, like there's a lot of cool new tools that like will query your data for you. So you say, tell me how many orders there were in this quarter, and it can quickly build a graph for you. But if your orders table is not in the correct format, or you have 7 orders tables, it's going to have the exact same issue as a human user would, because it's not easy to understand. Yeah. So there can be different applications, but it's understanding how would we get there? What is actually going to be useful? What is a hype? What is just like, do you just want to be able to tick the box to say we use AI to do something, or is there like an actual problem we can solve with it?
Yeah, and I think you see that a lot with the hype around a new technology, and like it is incredible, and it is it has massively simplified the way people interact with AI. But I do find myself going, yes, it's hype because I know the kind of underlying challenges that have been solved. A lot of our clients are dealing with poor documentation around tables. Even if they have one orders table, there might not be sufficient documentation to even understand what the columns are, or what the values it contains. So I always going to be stuck, just like I said, like a human is going to be stuck. And so even if the technology is not all hype, it feels like there's still some groundwork to build. Figuring out what.
And I think having the Wardley map helps explain it. So I can be like, your AI, here's your AI kind of little components on the map. It needs these 5 things, and these 5 things are not in a good state. They maybe were very fit for purpose 5 years ago, 10 years ago when they were first created, but now they've kind of drifted a little bit more because no one's paid attention to them in the past couple of years. So we need to pay attention to them now, get them in a better state, because that can then help your little AI dot move towards the right.
Awesome. Again, like that, I just love that. Like you're absolutely right. The technical stuff that people care about. Yeah, there's a thing they want to do with it, which is kind of understanding their side of the hype. And then there's this kind of like infrastructure that they can immediately see. Well, it depends on all these things. That's cool.
Because that's easy to explain. You can be like, but why can't we do this? Well, because we have to do these 3 things first before we can do that. And once that's done, then this is much easier to do. Because now you can do that. You can do the AI, you can do the ML. But you're going to struggle because you're going to end up having to like hack things or improve things anyway just to get that part to work.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Jessica. It's been fantastic to hear about your own journey and on the High Street's journey and the technology journey you're on. And we even touched on AI, which I didn't fully expect us to get to, but it seems like if you're in data, it's probably a logical place we arrive at eventually. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Look forward to speaking again.
Cool, too.